When the Bruichladdich Distillery on Islay reopened in 2001, they prided themselves on transparency, letting you know every nerdy, whiskey geek-oriented detail about all of their releases, except for one, the Black Art release. And when investigating today's whiskey, the Black Art 11.1, investigating the mystery that surrounds these releases, I found out something about the Bruichladdich Distillery that I never knew. My name is Matt. This is Whiskey on the West Coast. The Bruichladdich Black Art releases have always been kind of shrouded in the mystery of the dark arts of whiskey making. And we've never really known the type of casks that have gone into them. We can approximate a little bit, but we're really only guessing. We know nothing for certain. But one of the things we typically do know about these Black Art releases is their vintage. Typically we have an idea of their age, we know the ABV, but typically we do know the year that they were distilled. And all of the Black Art releases have been pre-Renaissance Bruichladdich distillate. So from before the distillery reopened in 2001. If we're talking about the distillery reopening, we should talk about how it got to that point. And so when White & Mackay bought Bruichladdich Distillery from Invergordon Distillers Limited in 1994, they immediately deemed it surplus to their requirements. And they mothballed the distillery. They shuttered the gates. They closed the distillery. And that was a big loss for the Islay community. Now, thankfully, in 2000, Mark Renier, as well as Murray McDavid, and a group of interested buyers did purchase the distillery to save it from its slumber. And with this, they brought Jim McEwan, the legendary Jim McEwan, on board to help them start producing whiskey again in 2001. So Renaissance, post-Renaissance would be 2001 onward, pre-Renaissance, 2001 prior, but the distillery closed in 1994. So you'd assume that if we're talking pre-Renaissance whiskey, it's pre-1994 or 1994 beforehand. And typically the Black Art releases have followed this trajectory. The very first Black Art release was 1989 distillate, 19 years old, followed with the next two releases, same thing, 1989 distillate, a bit older. We've had 1990, 1992, onward to 1994, and the 10.1 before this was 29 years old, but it was the first one not to feature a vintage. Now, if you reverse engineered that age, 29-year-old that was released in 2022, you'd know that the youngest year or the earliest year it could have been distilled was 1993, all before 1994 or including 1994. The 11.1, however, is a little bit different. And here's why. The 11.1 has no vintage attached to it. However, it has an age statement, and that age statement is 24 years old. Now, if we just do some simple math here and we calculate this out, that would mean that the youngest whiskey in the 11.1, the Bruichladdich Black Art 11.1, the youngest whiskey in it is from 1999. I'm sorry, I thought the distillery was closed. What is going on here? This is what I found out. While closed, the distillery was taken care of by a skeleton crew, including and led by Duncan McGilvery, the former distillery manager from before it closed. And I've heard this part of the story a bit before, where they were there as caretakers to manage and keep up the distillery so that if there was a buyer, that the distillery could be reawoken. Now, part of this distillery crew's operation was running the stills to make sure that everything could function normally. This is something that's happened at other closed distilleries before. The crew at Highland Park would go to the Scapa distillery to make sure it's still operational. When Ardbeg was closed, a crew of workers from Laphroaig would go over there and they'd do distillation runs to make sure everything was operational. If you check Whiskey Base, which is just such a great source for information on all things whiskey. If you check Whiskey Base, you will see vintages, you will see distillation years between the closure dates of 1994 and 2001. You will see 1995, 1996, 1998 is the bulk of it, and there was at least one bottling from, I believe, April of 1999. So there actually was whiskey that went into cask from this period when the Bruichladdich distillery was shuttered, was closed, was mothballed. I did not know this. I learned something by researching the mystery that's behind the enigma that is Black Art 11.1. I did also find that there's been some official bottlings from Bruichladdich from this time, including their Ancien Regime 1806-98. On that bottle, you will find quotes to the effect of, among the very last spirit to be distilled under the old order. And they finish this off with the end of an era. Well, that may have been a little bit presumptive, because I believe we have whiskey from Bruichladdich that was distilled in 1999 in this Black Art 11.1. So maybe that era isn't quite over yet. As mentioned earlier, only 2 individuals actually know the recipes that go behind these Black Art releases. And for the first 4, that would be Jim McEwan. And for the last 7, that would be the current Master Distiller, Adam Hannett. Now, personally, this is the 5th Black Art release that I've been able to try. I'm lucky to try that many. I have tried the 7.1, the 8.1, 9.1, 10.1, and now the 11.1 that's in my glass here. Personally, I don't own many Black Art releases, but I do own this one, which is the 7.1. I have it open. I have a glass on the table here that I've been using for some comparisons as well. Outside of that, the stats on this Bruichladdich Black Art 11.1, as mentioned, 24 years old, no vintage. It's 44.1% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color, no cask info, and it runs about $780 Canadian. That's a pretty steep price, especially when you're comparing it to the prices these used to go for. The only other thing I'd mention is eventually we're going to run out of pre-Renaissance Bruichladdich distillate. And even when I visited the distillery with Kyla, when we visited Islay in 2023, I think the oldest cask that we saw was a cask of 1992 Bruichladdich. The stocks are really thinning out, and I do wonder how many more Black Art releases we're gonna see. Let's get to the whiskey and the tasting notes. The Bruichladdich Black Art 11.1 on the nose. After quite a while in the glass, about an hour, it really has opened up and become much more expressive. It started off quite shy. I should mention this is from a sample I got from Kensington Wine Market. And yeah, being opened up, being left in the glass has really done this a lot of favors. It started off quite timid, not very evocative of much, but it really is quite a lot nicer now. Distinct like black tea notes, which is something I got off the 7.1. Like there's these prune and sultana notes, dried apricot, orange, leather. I mean, yeah, it's not entirely dissimilar from the 7.1. I'd just say there's a little bit more force behind the 7.1, but I actually think this is a pretty classy nose. I'm really, really digging this. Eventually it gets to that like orange pico black tea note that I have previously identified in the 7.1, which I really enjoy. I also pick up mango and honey. And when I'm searching for that honey, behind all those like richer, darker, denser notes, there's also some florals to it. Which when I think florals and honey, I think Manuka honey. Yeah, I will say I believe there's less depth and less richness in this nose when compared to the 7.1. But that was more noticeable when this first was opening up, within probably the first 20 minutes. Now it's actually caught up quite substantially. All right, let's check out the palate. Slunge. I didn't want to drain that one down the hatch. Leather, tobacco, dunnage, sultanas, fig jam, overly steeped black tea, lots of tannins, lots of oak impact, from those years. There's probably older casks in this than just the 1999 distillate, which is probably why they didn't throw a vintage onto this release. Oh, fruit leather like you'd get in your lunch bags when you were going to school, grade school as a kid. Candied apricots. Oh man. Orange and chocolate, and it's just really hitting hard those richer, earthier notes of like tobacco and leather. There's even something a little bit savory in there too, almost going towards like teriyaki or soy sauce. Really enjoying that. That reminds me of a Claxton's Tobermory I had, Tobermory 26-year-old. So again, old single malt, sherried or fortified wine matured whiskey. I will say, I think there's a bit of there's that plum jam again on the finish. I think there's a bit of like something a bit more bitter from that oak, maybe like approaching bitter but fruity, so like approaching like a grapefruit zest. One more sip here. I'm gonna focus on just some final tasting notes and a little bit on the finish, and then we'll get to a score. Almonds, like amaretto, almond liqueur. Really liking that. A slight bit of like a rich coffee note, almost like a toffee nut latte. There's a bit of like nuttiness in there too, possibly from some Oloroso sherry casks. We'll never know. They're never gonna share the recipes with us. Just a bit of spicing on the back end here too, along with that fruit and that those sherried notes. Make me think like Christmas cake. That oak really is quite impactful. And it's carrying some like menthol herbaceousness with it as well. But I think that amaretto note actually comes out the strongest on the finish. Now, when comparing it to the 7.1, I'm not going to do a full comparison here. If you guys really want me to review the 7.1, I'll review it. It's just sometimes with these older bottlings, you guys might not be as interested because you can't really readily buy these. The 11.1 is still on shelves for that $780. And you can purchase it if you want, but the nose is just a lot more in your face, a lot more brash, not as shy, but really they're actually quite close now. You can tell they're of the same sort of cask makeup and the same distillate character. So I'm really enjoying that. There's just like so much more force on the palate for the 7.1, and it is a full, I think, 4 and a bit % higher than the 11.1, but I just think there's much more complexity, much more to pick through in that bottling than the 11.1. It also was much less expensive, actually less than half the price for the bottle I paid anyways. If I was scoring the 7.1, I'm in the 90 plus territory. 90 points, might be higher if I really sit down and try to pin a score on it. For this 11.1, really enjoyed the nose. I enjoyed the palate. It is up my alley. I am a big Bruichladdich fan. I'm a laddie fanboy. I'm really grappling with an 87 to an 88. And considering the price, and price shouldn't come into play too much, but if I'm kind of trying to decide between two different scores, I'm gonna err on the side of caution and go to the lower one if I think it's priced a little high. And as I said, they're running out of this distillate. It is rare now. I can see why they're going to charge a premium for it, so I can't blame them for that. But it is more than I would like to pay. That is the reason why I don't own a bottle, because I think the price is a little dear. So I'm going to give this a score of 87 out of 100. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me here on Whiskey on the West Coast. Thank you to my Patreon members that support the channel monetarily. You guys are really helping me to get on the bus here and make more reviews. Thank you for all you who comment, who like, share, subscribe, and just support the channel in whatever way you do. I appreciate it greatly, guys, and I can't wait to shoot another whiskey review right after this one. Until next time, guys, from the West Coast, I'll lift up this Bruichladdich 11.1. Slàinte.